rarely seen but always heard. It's the telltale shimmer, often the last thing you ever saw. He stalks the jungle, the suburbs, and foreign worlds. He's fought Austrian bodybuilders, law enforcement, and another famous alien race. He defined the action movie genre in the 80s and has become a cultural touchstone ever since. When we first saw the titular creature in John McTiernan's 1987 action classic Predator, the world was hooked. An intelligent humanoid creature that saw humanity not as food or conquest, but as worthy game to be hunted, was drastically different compared to the standard lizard creatures of sci-fi. But alas, the Predator didn't escape the usual fate of movie monsters from Hollywood. He would have financial flops, disappointing follow-ups, reboots, and behind-the-scenes fighting. With the latest entry just around the corner, it's time we look back and find out how we got here in the first place. In this video, we will first cover the history of the Predator franchise, from the first two movies and the Alien vs. Predator debacle to Robert Rodriguez's Predators. Then we'll discuss Shane Black's The Predator, its multiple delays in release, and extensive reshoots. The idea behind Predator can be traced all the way back to 1985's Rocky IV. The entire franchise had become bloated and something of a Hollywood punchline. What began as a relatable story of a down-on-his-luck, washed-up boxer from Philadelphia had evolved to servant robots, fighting Hulk Hogan, super steroid Russians, and winning the Cold War. A common joke at the time that was constantly repeated from studios all the way to LA comedy clubs was that Rocky Balboa had defeated every challenge a boxer could face on Earth. If a fifth film was to be made, his opponent would have to be something not of this world. Evidently, two people got quite a lot out of that joke. Screenwriting brothers John and Jim Thomas took great inspiration from that joke and combined it with an idea of a man being hunted by the unknown. Over the course of 3 months, they wrote a screenplay titled Hunter. Part action thriller, part most dangerous game with an alien. It was a unique idea, but it was soundly rejected by several studios. Eventually though, 20th Century Fox thought it was a winning idea, so they picked it up. The film was handed to producer Joel Silver, who had financed the Schwarzenegger film Commando. He personally decided to take the script and turn it from a small, pulpy, in-the-jungle flick into a big-budget Hollywood blockbuster. To help, Silver brought his former boss, Lawrence Gordon, to co-produce along with John Davis. After several up-and-coming filmmakers had been considered, such as New Zealand director Jeff Murphy, producer Joel Silver eventually landed on a fairly unknown director named John McTiernan. He had previously only directed the critical flop Nomads, but Silver thought his style and skill set would be perfect for the movie they were imagining. For the leading man, Silver went with the same larger-than-life action hero he had worked with on Commando, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Schwarzenegger readily agreed to play the part, and to match him, the producers went looking for other larger-than-life actors. The cast thus came to include actors like Carl Weathers, former WWE wrestling superstar Jesse Ventura, and Sonny Landham. For the role of the creature, now named the Predator, a young Belgian martial artist looking for his big break was initially cast. You might have heard of him, Jean-Claude Van Damme. However, problems would soon arise with both the casting of Van Damme and with the creature itself. While extremely agile, defined, and well-trained by any normal metric, Van Damme looked short and quite unimposing next to Schwarzenegger, with Schwarzenegger having 4 inches in height and nearly 75 pounds on Van Damme. Making the audience buy into Schwarzenegger being the underdog of the two would require suspension of disbelief. Furthermore, Van Damme was very unhappy about being hidden in what he considered to be a stupid-looking costume, which was difficult to move in and so uncomfortable to wear he even passed out in it. Van Damme was eventually replaced with actor Kevin Peter Hall, who was so much taller than Schwarzenegger it solved the issue of the Predator not being sufficiently physically imposing. However, Van Damme wasn't the only one who thought the suit looked pretty lame. There was wide agreement on the set that the original design, which was significantly different from the final release version, did not work. The initial design had a dog-like head, sported bright yellow eyes, and it scared no one. The solution came from Arnold Schwarzenegger, who recommended his special effects friend from the Terminator, the legendary Stan Winston. The studio arranged the practicalities, but since Winston came aboard at such a late stage in the movie's production, he was given just 6 weeks to produce a better creature design. While on a flight back to the Fox studio, Winston was trying to come up with better ideas when he was approached by Aliens director James Cameron. He suggested that a creature with mandibles would be quite intimidating. Winston took this idea to heart, and after studying a Rastafarian warrior painting in producer Joel Silver's office, he knew what to make: the Predator as we now know him. But even with a working creature, filming in the jungles of Mexico was a constant struggle for nearly everyone involved. From temperatures so cold it necessitated heat lamps to leech-filled lakes and constant bouts of dysentery from unpurified water. The terrain itself was a constant problem. It was consistently rough and hilly, which made filming very difficult. By the time filming wrapped, many thought that the true survival test had simply been surviving the production. But arguably, it had been worth it. Upon its release on June 12, 1987, Predator was a smash hit, earning $98.3 million against a $15 million budget in 1987 dollars. The titular hunter instantly became one of the most iconic movie creatures of the 1980s. Its design often ripped off by lesser films, but never bettered. Critically though, the movie took a bit of a beating upon release, with some reviewers calling it empty, grisly, and dull. It did have its defenders, such as Roger Ebert, who gave it 3 stars and deemed it an effective action movie.
So it is exactly what it is. It is a pure summer action picture. Yeah. It is 2 hours of excitement. This looks and sounds right. It feels right. There's a lot of energy in it, and that's what it is. Of course it's a cross between Aliens and Rambo, but so what?
With the passage of time, it would be seen in a far more positive light, with many calling it one of Arnold's best movies and one of the best action movies of the 80s. Like most major hits of the 80s, a sequel was quickly greenlit following Predator's massive box office results. The Thomas brothers returned to write the film along with all of its producers. Director John McTiernan, however, did not return. McTiernan had become an in-demand director following the release of Die Hard and was busy working on The Hunt for Red October. Dangerous Game and A Nightmare on Elm Street 5 director Stephen Hopkins was chosen to replace him. Another key member of the original film also wouldn't return for a sequel, namely Arnold Schwarzenegger himself. He was offered just $250,000 to return, which he flatly refused. Lethal Weapon star Danny Glover would instead take over the leading role. Inspired by the Dark Horse Predator comics, which were released the previous year, the Thomas brothers decided to set the film in an urban landscape, and for budget reasons, Los Angeles was chosen. The film script also added a lot to the lore of the Predators, showing how its species operated. One notable scene would include a reference to the popular Alien film series, a reference which was also inspired by the then recent Dark Horse comics. Upon release on November 21, 1990, the film was mostly torn apart by critics, calling it unoriginal, mindless, and mean-spirited. Even original Predator defender Roger Ebert decried it as angry and ugly.
As a high-tech thriller, it does its job, but it doesn't have much imagination. Here's a visitor from outer space, after all, and he has about the same taste and personality as Freddy Krueger or any other slasher villain. I wish there had been less violence in this movie and more of the vision of science fiction.
From a box office standpoint, it did significantly worse than the original, grossing just $57.1 million with a $35 million budget. Though the film would go on to be a cult classic, this meant little to the producers. A third film was out of the question. It would take many years for the Predator to return, and that return would be inspired by that one little reference to the Dark Horse comics. Alien vs. Predator was a comic miniseries that launched in late 1989, and it quickly became a runaway hit. It spawned comic book sequels, books, and even video games. It kept both the Alien and Predator series alive in the eyes of the public, while both franchises faced great difficulties on film. The idea of actually making an Alien vs. Predator movie can be traced back to 1991, when writer Peter Briggs successfully pitched such a screenplay to Fox. But the project wouldn't go anywhere for another decade. After years of development, competing scripts, and micromanagement, courtesy of Tom Rothman, the Paul W. S. Anderson directed AvP was released on August 12 of 2004. Critics were indifferent, and though the fanbase of both franchises were unified in their wide disapproval of the PG-13 rating, they were otherwise divided. The movie was a decent hit though, making $172.5 million worldwide on a budget of $60 million. Not as profitable as Fox would have liked, but profitable enough to move forward with a sequel. A cheaper sequel, much cheaper. None of the cast of the first AvP returned, and the movie was given to the Strauss brothers, who had done special effects for various films and directed numerous commercials and music videos. To further keep costs down, the movie took place in suburbia. With the budget slashed as much as it was, Fox did however allow the R rating this time around, and used it for all it was worth as a selling point. That PG-13 rating that was a huge bone of contention with fans the last time around had not gone unnoticed. The movie was retitled from Alien vs. Predator Survival of the Fittest to Alien vs. Predator Requiem, just so the movie could be marketed as AvP-R. Despite the rating, the movie was met with an extremely negative reception for all its other flaws upon release on Christmas Day of 2007. Grossing $129 million on a budget of $40 million, the movie was profitable, but by such a small margin and with such a negative reception, that the plans for a third movie were scrapped. The Alien vs. Predator films had, at least for the time being, killed both franchises. Back in 1994, director Robert Rodriguez had been tasked with drafting a script for a potential third Predator film. Despite being busy developing Desperado at the time, he completed the script and handed it to Fox, who did not pursue it any further over budget concerns. 15 years later, that same script would no longer be prohibitively expensive to make. More importantly, it had just the back-to-the-roots approach the Predator franchise might need following the AvP movies, which, unlike the original Predator, had declined in standing with the passage of time. Robert Rodriguez would serve as writer and producer on Nimona Untal's directed Predator sequel, simply titled Predators. Rodriguez wanted an ensemble cast like in the original movie. He also wanted Arnold Schwarzenegger to return, but Schwarzenegger declined. Lawrence Fishburne instead would be cast in the role which served the same function as Schwarzenegger's Dutch Schaefer was intended for. The film's release on July 9, 2010 was met with mixed to positive reviews. Critics thought it was superior to both Predator 2 and the AvP series, but nowhere near the revised opinions on the original. It did decent enough at the box office, earning $127.2 million worldwide on a budget of $40 million, but not well enough to make a sequel a high priority for the studio. Rodriguez was interested in making a sequel, but in the end, nothing came of it. In 2014, Fox announced plans for an altogether different Predator film. Following the quiet demise of the sequel to Robert Rodriguez's Predators, Fox asked Shane Black, who had served as both co-star and co-writer of the original Predator, to return to the Predator franchise. Now an accomplished writer and director from the Lethal Weapon franchise and more recently from Iron Man 3, Shane Black signed on as both writer and director. Fred Decker, of Monster Squad fame, would help out as co-writer, while John Davis, producer on all previous movies featuring the Predator, would return once more. Already in early 2016, Black stated that his new movie would be titled The Predator, that it would be a sequel to the previous movies set in present day, and that he was aiming to make the film an event-like blockbuster that would elevate the series once again. Arnold Schwarzenegger was asked to reprise his role as Dutch Schaefer yet again, but he reportedly declined due to deeming the role too small. The movie was originally set for release in February of 2018, but the release was pushed back to March, then to August, and then finally to September, which will stick. We got our first inkling for the reason for the delays in March when co-writer Fred Decker confirmed on Twitter that he was back on set shooting some touch-ups. As it would later turn out, by touch-ups he actually meant reshooting the majority of the movie's third act. As it turned out, test audiences had issues with the movie's tone, as it was deemed too comedic in the wrong places. As such, the reshoots were aimed at fixing tonal issues, redoing all major character deaths, and incorporating more references to the earlier movies. If The Predator is a hit upon its September 14th release date, producer John Davis has indicated there will be sequels, and that a Shane Black-helmed Predator trilogy may be in the cards. Do you think the reshoots have augmented Shane Black's The Predator enough that the box office will justify a sequel? Or will it, like Predator 2 and the Predators before it, end up yet another one-off? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you like this video, then please click the subscribe button. And don't forget to click the bell icon to be notified for all the latest uploaded content. Due to recent changes to YouTube's monetization policies, we'd also like to ask you to please consider supporting Midnight's Edge and its sister channel Midnight's Edge After Dark through Patreon. As thanks for their support, patrons will receive early notifications of mini-documentaries, special behind-the-scenes making of the Edge videos, bloopers, outtakes, lost episodes, and more. You can support the channel for as little as $1 a month. Be sure to check back for news and analysis on the corporate politics behind your favorite genre movies, as well as updates and discussion here at Midnight's Edge.